further debate? The member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am glad to be able to stand and add my voice as the official opposition critic for infrastructure, transportation and highways on Bill 154, which is called an Act to enact the Recovery Through Growth Act regarding the City of Toronto and the Rebuilding Ontario Place Act. It's a finance bill, but the meat and potatoes of it are around the Ontario Place redevelopment and all that entails. Anyone tuning in from home might think that this is a debate around the well-being of Toronto. But interestingly, for the first time in my 9.5 years being here, I see in a piece of legislation a legislated conversation. So normally when we see, articles and items in legislation, it's things that are legally binding and whatnot. It's creating the law, but this is creating a discussion plan, and I've never seen that before. It's interesting. So while the government members have been debating a recent government announcement about the deal for Toronto, which folks are looking at with interest, lots of people looking at it with hope from all sides and hoping that indeed Toronto will get more of what it needs to be able to invest in infrastructure that is needed in the city. But that is based on a government announcement, right? And the press conference and the announcement that folks have been hearing about is not in this bill. So this bill, Schedule 1, is a page long. And I'm going to read straight from the bill because if you're listening to the debate, you would have no idea that what is in the bill isn't binding, isn't even compelling. It is about discussions between the province and the city. 1, the Government of Ontario and the City of Toronto shall continue to discuss the following. Shall continue to discuss is what it says in the bill. Okay? And it's a 5-point plan, 4.5. The first point is the FG Gardiner Expressway and the Don Valley Parkway, including the, wait for it, possibility of those highways and the associated rights of way becoming provincial responsibilities. So everyone is talking about the uploading as being a done deal, and I hope that it is, if that's what is on the table and that's what folks are expecting. But what it says in the legislation is the Government of Ontario and the City of Toronto shall continue to discuss the possibility of those highways and the associated rights of way becoming provincial responsibilities. So it's a maybe. Point 2 that they shall discuss is financial support for the Toronto Transit Commission subway system, including for initiatives to improve public safety and security. So they are now being legislated to have a discussion around those points. Okay. By the way, they're allowed to talk about these things without legislation. There is a zero requirement for a law that says thou shalt discuss the following points. Okay? So this is all a fun way of naming a bill. What is the fun name for this? It's the short title. New Deal for Toronto Act. Okay? So I think what they'd like to do is to get us up talking against this bill, and then they'll spin it and say, oh, the NDP hates a New Deal for Toronto or what have you, when the whole bill, except for one page, is about the redevelopment of Ontario Place. But point 3 of this legislated discussion is the use of provincial and municipal surplus lands within the City of Toronto to more effectively address housing needs. And it goes on, including the supply of all forms of housing and other priorities of the province and the City of Toronto. Okay, so this is about the legislated discussion that they have to have. And point 4 of the legislated discussion that they must have is about financial support to the City of Toronto for shelters and other homelessness programs and services, wait for it, conditional on financial support from the Government of Canada for homelessness programs and services for refugees and asylum seekers. So they have to discuss it. It's it's point 4 of their legislated discussion as per Schedule 1 of this bill, but it's conditional upon financial support from the feds. So if the feds pony up the cash, then the province will have this discussion. Or we'll have the discussion about money that will only happen if the feds pony it up. And the fifth point is any other matters prescribed by the regulation. So there's a legislative discussion about other matters that are yet to be determined because Cabinet hasn't decided what they are yet. So this is not something you can sink your teeth into, and it certainly does not, it doesn't echo what we have seen in the announcement. This is legislating and conversation, but don't worry, folks. Section 3 of this schedule is this act is repealed. So we're legislating a discussion that doesn't need to be legislated because levels of government can always have discussions. Then it will be repealed. And it will be repealed, it says that section of the act being repealed, like it never happened, comes into force on a day to be named by proclamation of the Lieutenant Governor. So all of this brouhaha and all of the magic that the government is committing to Toronto is not written down. So there's that. Okay. This bill is not about the New Deal for Toronto. Everyone is interested in that, and that is happening between the province, and it's happening between them and the city, and a lot of people have a lot of interest in that, okay? But let's not pretend it's written down in the bill, and let's not pretend that you need a piece of legislation to have a conversation with the mayor of the City of Toronto. That's not a thing. It's creative, I'll give you that. This bill is about the government irresponsibly giving itself power to bypass and even break multiple provincial laws in order to jam through the Ontario Place redevelopment on behalf of a private luxury spa operator with near total impunity. And it's been really fascinating to be part of this discussion while some of the government members have hollered at us, we're legislators, we make the laws, right, that we're not breaking them because we make them. Well, existing legislation, existing laws, obviously ain't fit in this bill or isn't meeting the needs of this minister and this government, which is why we have before us all sorts of new workarounds and all sorts of new protections to protect itself. So Schedule 1 of the bill, like I said, there's no requirement that anybody do anything other than have these discussions. It doesn't say what must come out of those discussions. It's legislated conversations, which I've never heard of before, but okay. There is no apparent reason why legislation would be required for these discussions to occur. There is no apparent clear purpose for Schedule 1. You've made your announcement. You have everyone's attention on what will happen with those discussions in Toronto, and putting it in legislation, there ain't nothing here that is binding or required. So it's just more of a game of if we vote against the legislation, we vote against Toronto. That's all that is being set up here. Schedule 2, however, is a totally different bucket. It is a piece of legislation, like an actual one. Schedule 2, the Rebuilding Ontario Place Act, it starts on page 3 of the bill. Okay, it starts on page 3 of the bill, and it goes all the way to page 16. It's substantive, and it gives the Ontario government extraordinary powers over the Ontario Place redevelopment, as well as legal indemnifications that go much further than previous bills to fast-track the construction process, to fast-track this project. It allows the Minister of Infrastructure to prescribe certain lands and real property to be vested in the Crown, so expropriated but not under the Expropriations Act, so this is a whole new thing, to put under the control of the Minister to become part of the Ontario Place site. The Crown shall pay compensation based on the appraised market value of the property. The Minister can make regulations requiring the City of Toronto to take specified actions with respect to that vested property. It gives the Minister of Infrastructure a whole whack of power and authority. No one, including the City of Toronto, may sell or encumber any of these lands, except as allowed by Cabinet. allows the Minister of Infrastructure to issue minister's zoning orders. So it confers that power upon this minister and unilaterally rewrite Toronto's official plan with respect to the Ontario Place site. The minister may ignore the provincial policy statement and provincial plans. The Environmental Assessment Act does not apply to any undertaking at the Ontario Place site. The Ontario Heritage Act does not apply to the Ontario Place site or to any buildings or structures on the site. Cabinet can decide if maybe the pods or the Cinesphere or something, if they decide that it has heritage, they can make those decisions. Noise regulations don't apply. It's taking it outside of the rules and making it its own. It puts it outside of the existing laws. And so I'm going to watch my wording because I know that the member opposite has been, hollering all day that we're legislators and we can legislate laws, so we're not breaking them because we're making them. But existing laws exist for a reason. And why on earth does this particular project have to step so far outside of those? What are the plans? Why do we have to have these magical protections? Where's the bill? Here's the bill. We've been talking about it all day. The protections, I want to find it because it's just a whole list of misfeasance and all of these bad, yucky things that the government will be. Oh, I found it. No remedy. Right, the no remedy section. No costs, compensation, or damages, including for loss of revenues or loss of profit, are owing or payable to any person, and no remedy, including but not limited to a remedy in contract, restitution, tort, misfeasance, bad faith, trust, or fiduciary obligation, any equitable remedy or any remedy under any statute is available to any person in connection with anything referred to in subsection 1 against any person referred to in that subsection. I wonder what that means. I wonder what that's going to look like. I wonder with this project, I'm hoping, we hope that all projects in Ontario run smoothly, but if it doesn't, it sounds like folks are not going to have a way to get restitution or remedy because the government, again, has kind of put itself above existing laws, rewriting them to protect themselves. I guess I wonder what they're expecting. Anyway, disappointing. I want to talk about the infrastructure estimates process. I had been a part of June as the critic, and I sat opposite Minister of Infrastructure and Michael Lindsay from Infrastructure Ontario, and that was where we learned a lot about the Ontario Place redevelopment. And that's where we found out there was no fairness monitor, as I had asked and been told. There wasn't a scoring process for the bids. In fact, that section was interesting because I said, was there a fairness monitor for the call for development process? And Mr. Lindsay said, we worked closely with entities like Colliers and others to make sure that there was a fair and transparent process that was put in place in reviewing the call for development. So the folks got in a room and reviewed them, okay? And when I asked about I said, who certified the scorecards for the Ontario Place redevelopment procurement? And it was, we had an evaluation team drawn from across government along with subject matter experts that reviewed all the bids. There was an evaluation logic. As I said, it's specified in the 2019 call for development proposals, and it was against that criteria that the bids were ultimately evaluated and ranked. So a bunch of folks get in a room, and this is a process that Colliers was involved and others. I had asked for the list of who was involved in that process, and I was told they would take it back to the ministry. So, I don't know. But, a bunch of guys sitting in the room where it happened, right? And we'd all love to know. I'm not going to start singing Hamilton, but that's what I'm thinking is, this is the room where it happened, and no one gets to know how this decision was made, what put Therma at the top of the heap, why was the deadline extended? Therma hadn't submitted its bid. There was extra time. In fairness, Therma wasn't the only bid to submit after that extension, but it was the one that got the free parking garage. I say free. It was the one that had the add-on of the parking structure paid for with public dollars when no one else got that offer. This is a 95-year lease with a private company, with an Austrian spa owner. No one gets to have the terms of the lease. Mr. Lindsay talked about it being, in respecting the global relationships and business. But the folks in Ontario also have a right to know what is in that lease. Certainly with the injunction that has been filed by Ontario Place for All, they have asked for, the lease. They're hoping that the courts will ensure that Ontarians have some access to this information. Just looking back at the notes, for folks who are interested in that original conversation, it was quite interesting. It was the day that we learned not only about there not being a fairness monitor and that the process was not transparent, but it was the day we found out about Ontario Place and the parking garage having the Science Centre on top. That was new. Speaker, the Ontario Place deal has been problematic from the beginning. I have spent a lot of time in this House talking about that process, asking for the business case. I know that we got something business case adjacent today about the Science Centre. But again, that tells the story of it's so much less expensive to do the repairs, to be good landlords, to maintain a building that has, a potential life of 250 or more years, as Moriyama had said. Although the other day I had asked the Minister of Infrastructure a question around why we can't look after the Science Centre. And it came back that it's a 50-year-old building and that essentially, it puts it past its prime as we stand here in a 120-some-odd-year-old. Well, and I'm actually, if 50 is the cutoff for past your prime, I am still not there yet, so I'm fine. But the minister likened it to cars and houses being past, like 50 years. Like, can we just acknowledge that that's a long time? And I think a 95-year lease with a glass and water structure seems a lot riskier than a 50-year-old concrete building. I don't think anything sits well with Ontarians about this deal, and because nothing is transparent, of course we have problems. Of course we have questions. This particular bill in Schedule 2, as I said, it allows the Minister of Infrastructure to issue minister zoning orders and unilaterally rewrite Toronto's official plan with respect to the Ontario Place site. The Environmental Assessment Act does not apply to any undertaking at the Ontario Place site. The Ontario Heritage Act does not apply to the Ontario Place site. Question about that as well. Do we have a minister responsible for heritage in the province? And I'm actually asking as a real question, because I'm looking at a minister opposite that I know is like sports, culture, and tourism. Yes, I'm getting a nod. And then the other minister that I would have thought responsible is the Minister of Citizenship and Multiculturalism. Nowhere do I see the word heritage. So have we just moved it into committee and we're good? Is it still under, are there still bureaucrats and folks at the Ministry for Heritage? MCM is what you're saying. So that's Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism, but we don't say the word heritage anymore in terms of title, which I guess then it's not a surprise that we're not going to factor heritage in when it comes to the Ontario Place site necessarily, which is disappointing. But this bill is almost entirely about giving this government extraordinary powers to bypass various laws in order to push through this Ontario Place redevelopment on behalf of Therma. It denies civil legal remedies for any government misconduct or damages that may occur. That is really not how a government should be undertaking a project that they tout as being, a rejuvenation or a next chapter that Ontarians should be excited about. Ontarians are nervous, and they have reason to be because it's this government. Thank you, Speaker.
Questions? The member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Yes, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member from Oshawa for her comments. Oshawa, I've been to Oshawa, not too far from where the Ontario Place is, Thixon Road, very nice. And I just want to kind of comment on three things that we know at this point. One, we know that Ontario Place currently is very dilapidated, has very few visitors, it's been run down, not maintained by the previous government, supported by the opposition. Number two, what we know is this redevelopment will create thousands of jobs and have millions of visitors in the future. So a great economic engine for the GTA. Number three, what we know is on the Science Centre, it was announced today that the business case for the replacement of the Science Centre has a benefit of hundreds of millions of dollars. So hugely positive. So my question is, does the member prefer the current dilapidated state of Ontario Place as the vision for the future, or will she embrace this exciting vision that the government has?
Response, the member from Oshawa.
So, what we know in terms of your 1, 2, and 3, Ontario Place Corporation Chair, a good friend of the Premier's, said that they had almost 3 million visitors last year. So while the Minister of Infrastructure had sold that as, well, basically she's trying to sell us on that story, but it is nonsense. People absolutely have been there. The Ontario Science Centre, I think you called it a business case that came out today. We've been waiting for a long time for that, and the government has had reports on its desk that have not been shared. Oh, wait, no, that's from Ontario Place Corporation. We're talking about the Science Centre. I blend them together because there's so much nonsense happening at the same time. But the Ontario Science Centre has been let to fall into disrepair by its landlord, none other than the illustrious Infrastructure Ontario, right?
Question?
And in terms of you could invest into the repairs, that is far less expensive than moving it, and you're not just moving it, you're diminishing it. It's going to be smaller than the original, and that is a shame. That is a shame.
Question, the member from Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member from Oshawa. So I'm very concerned about Section 17, and what I see is extinguishment of causes of action, no remedy, proceedings barred, retrospective effect, and then we have all of these terms, owing or payable to any person, no remedy, including but not limited to a remedy in contract, restitution, tort, misfeasance, bad faith, trust or fiduciary obligation, any equitable remedy or any remedy under any statute, and so on and so on. So all of this is barred, and it's even made retroactive. It really begs the question, what has already been done that needs to be suddenly made legal when it wasn't legal before?
Question. Response, member from Oshawa.
Exact right questions, because the thing is, when we look at projects happening around the province, we would want to see transparency, right? And different communities that have had bad things happen, or, like I'm looking at projects that are missing deadlines, are costing a lot more money. Folks want answers, and the government either doesn't have them or won't share them, because oftentimes it's the P3s and things are hidden in behind, and you just get to find out when it's handed back to you at the end, right? So I don't know whether this is just protection for just in case, or if there already are things that have gone sideways. But I know that no one in the province trusts this government anymore, and that's disappointing, because historically the province builds stuff. We all rely on that infrastructure. So where we see this kind of proactive, I don't know that it's proactive, I don't know if it's protectionist. I have no idea why it's there. I believe that section is a mistake and unnecessary, is heavy-handed, but it does beg the question, what on earth is it for?
Further questions? The member from Eglinton Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member from Oshawa for her comments. I have the Ontario Science Centre Modernisation business case and the key findings here in front of me. And the business case considered previous reviews and enlisted the expertise of Ernst & Young to ensure the findings were comprehensive and applied best practices for analysis, enlisted the expertise of Lord Cultural Resources, who provided cultural advisory services relating to the Science Centre, including functional programs, etc., and a range of stakeholders, etc., were consulted. But the results of the business case analysis include that the total capital investment required to remain at the Don Mills site actually exceeds the cost of constructing a new Ontario Science Centre facility at Ontario Place, and relocating the Science Centre will save taxpayers $257 million over a 50-year period when compared to the current site. Just the opposite of what the member just said. So are you going to review the business case, and are you going to support the movement of the Science Centre to Ontario Place?
Response, the member from Oshawa.
Of course, I'm not going to support the teardown and destruction of a building that has the potential to continue lasting and being a treasure for that community and for Ontarians for another, for 250 years. But when you're talking about the total capital investment and functional programs, it was the minister herself who said at the Infrastructure Estimates Committee, we will have a water park, a wellness centre, and a brand new science centre with more exhibition space. Okay, that was then, and this is now. The RFP for a diminished science centre at Ontario Place highlights the space constraints. So what we see about the functional program says that 3 elements that were originally in that functional program that you referred to there had to be cut from it, quote, due to a required reduction in the size of the building square footage requiring rationalization of the current activities. So there won't be everything like the TELUS rainforest or planetarium or all the things that were originally listed as functional programs. So is it going to cost less because you're cutting out massive parts of it and it's going to be such a reduced footprint and experience? I don't know. Why don't you invest an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure?
For the question, the member from London West.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, the member for Oshawa, for the work that she did at the Heritage, Infrastructure and Cultural Policy Committee when the CEO of Infrastructure Ontario was there, and she had the opportunity to question him about the call for the redevelopment of Ontario Place. And one of the things that she learned in that line of questioning was that there was no fairness monitor appointed for the Ontario Place call for development. There were no scoring criteria or scorecards, apparently, that had been used to assess the bids. I wondered if the member could comment on the appropriateness of determining the outcome of a RFP process without a fairness monitor, without any scoring criteria or scorecards.
Response, the member from Oshawa.
Well, it doesn't make anyone feel confident. Mr. Lindsay had outlined, as I said, but folks can read the Hansard, had outlined the process of everyone discussing the bids afterwards and coming to a decision. But when I asked who was in the room, I don't have that, right? It was going to be taken back to the ministry. So who are the fat cats in that space, or who are the experts, or who are the qualified professionals? I don't know. I have to guess who is making these decisions. And that does not inspire confidence in the process. Colliers, the Colliers Division, Colliers Capital Markets, helped design and oversee the procurement process for the Ontario Place redevelopment. And we've been talking about Colliers lately because they're the folks who are embedded within Infrastructure Ontario for over a decade, and they have the mega contracts for project management in the province. Like, everybody's interconnected. So why on earth wouldn't you want to put our minds at ease and have an accountable, transparent process, like scorecards, criteria, fairness monitor? We shouldn't have to beg for those things.
For the question, the member from Burlington.
Speaker, and thank you to the member from Oshawa for her comments. So growing up, Ontario Place was always an area, an attraction where I spent time as a teenager and in my early 20s, and it was a real destination and a place where we like to go to spend time around the marina, go to concerts. And I'm just curious, this redevelopment of Ontario Place will allow for
Question?
to bring it back into the tourist attraction it once was. So I'm just curious why you're opposed to seeing Ontario Place become the world-class destination it once
Quick response.
I have 20 seconds to answer that, and I'll read to you about Ontario Place for All, which is a citizens group that has filed an injunction to halt construction, and they have said, quote, "Make no mistake, this is a government-led project. From the development application to the site servicing to managing the public realm on the West Island for 95 years, the government is all over this project," end quote. This is not a project for Ontarians. This is a project for you.